Welcome to Long COVID Radical Self-Care, where I provide simple, non-medical tips and tools to help you on your healing journey. Today I want to talk about the fear that can come with having long COVID and offer some techniques for managing or reducing that fear. If you've watched a number of my videos, you know I don't recommend dwelling on the negative. But I do want to be real about this nasty condition and acknowledge how challenging it can be. But the main reason I'm talking about fear is that I think it's helpful to shine some light on it, to take a look so we can deal with it. It's like cleaning out a dark closet. As someone who is still living with long COVID, I divide the fear around it into two categories. The first involves the fears that relate to the condition in general. These fears might sound like this in your head. See if you can identify with one or two of them. What the heck is happening to my body? Why do these symptoms keep changing? Will I ever feel good again? Why doesn't anybody have answers for me? What if it never goes away? What if it gets worse? What if I get COVID again? Will it be worse? Will I die? What's this going to do to my life? Will I ever be able to work again? How will I pay the bills? Will I lose my home? These reflect some of the very real fears of people living with long COVID. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. The second category relates to fears associated with the specific symptoms. One of the most common symptoms of long COVID is shortness of breath, trouble breathing. Do you think that can cause some fear? We need only 4 things to survive, and breathing is one of them. I vividly remember going for a walk one day and having real trouble breathing. At one point, I honestly felt like I was suffocating. The air was coming in, but I wasn't getting enough oxygen. It reminded me of a time I almost drowned as a kid, taking in water instead of air. It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. I'll never forget it. I'm sure a lot of you can identify with the fear that comes with struggling to breathe. Long COVID patients who are dependent on supplemental oxygen may have some fears related to that as well, like machine malfunctions and power outages. Brain fog or memory loss is another common symptom that can generate a lot of fear. Fear of forgetting appointments, which I've done. Fear of getting lost, which I've also done. Fear of forgetting names and words and looking stupid. If brain fog is one of the symptoms you're dealing with, do you ever feel it's going to get worse? What does that scenario look like for you? Maybe you have heart palpitations. What kind of fear does that raise? Are you ever afraid you're going to have a heart attack? Terrifying, right? What about POTS, another common symptom of long COVID? What fears do you live with because of that? Do you suffer from dizzy spells? If you get those, you might be afraid of passing out and bumping your head or breaking bones. Some of you may have already experienced that. What about post-exertional malaise? That might leave you afraid you'll never be able to be productive again. There are lots of very legitimate fears that can accompany long COVID. It's not one of those diseases that has an easy diagnosis and proven treatment plan and prognosis. Drop a note in the comments below and let me know your greatest fear with long COVID. The problem with fear, of course, is that it puts your body into a state of stress and channels all your body's resources towards survival instead of healing. I talked about the fight or flight response in a previous episode. But to cut to the chase, you want to avoid being in an anxious or frightened state as much as possible, so you can channel your body's resources into healing. Not to mention it feels lousy to be in fear, and life's happier when we can dial that down. You might not be able to eliminate fears, but there are some tools and techniques to manage them. so they have less of a negative impact on your body. Here are a few techniques that I've used. Different techniques work at different times for different fears, so you can decide which one to use at any given time. My suggestions are always a bit like a buffet. Take what you want and leave the rest. First, I'd recommend you take a few minutes and actually write out some of your fears. Get it out into the open. Acknowledge it. Just start with a clean page and write out at the top of the page, "I'm afraid that," and write out all your fears in point form. Doesn't even have to be just long COVID. Now here are some strategies for managing them. 1. Think about other challenges you've overcome in your life. Have you had other illnesses you've overcome? What have been some of the biggest challenges you've ever faced in your life? Acknowledge your resilience and know that that same resilience will help you get through long COVID. 2. If you're a person of faith or spirituality, consider how those beliefs can be applied to your fears. For example, when fear starts to get a firm grip on me, I remind myself of some of my core beliefs. That life is meant to be a learning experience, always calling me to be better. That I have support on the other side. That we never die before we're meant to. And our lives are unfolding in divine order, whether we can see that or not. 3. As you go through your days, anytime you notice a fear about the future is starting to get to you or is taking up too much real estate in your mind, intentionally bring your focus to the current moment and affirm that you're okay right now, this moment. Try to spend less time worrying about the future by bringing your attention back to the here and now and the fact that you're okay right now. Don't miss the joy that's possible today by worrying about things that may or may not happen in the future. 4. Here's a strategy that has been very helpful for me a couple of times in my life. I don't even remember where I learned it, but it's an exercise I call, "What's the worst thing that could happen?" I know it seems a little contradictory for reducing fear, but it has worked for me and it may help you too. When you're afraid of something bad happening, take some time and mentally go through the worst case scenario step by step. You can either talk this exercise through with someone or write it down. What it does is take some of the energy out of that fear. Renowned psychiatrist Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." Fear can niggle at you for months or even years, but when you stop and face it, it can subside. As you go through the exercise, you'll usually eventually reach the point that there's nothing else bad that you can come up with, and things start to look up again. Here's an example. Let's say I'm afraid my disability claim will be denied. So I would ask myself, if it gets denied, then what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, I would run out of money. I wouldn't be able to pay my bills. Then what's the worst thing that could happen? I'd lose my home. Then where would you be? What's the worst thing that could happen? I'd have to live in my car. We all know in most cases this isn't going to happen, but for the sake of the exercise, we'll keep going. You're living in your car, and then what would happen? I might freeze to death, and then what would happen? I'd go to heaven. And then what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, nothing worse than that could happen. I'd be dead. I'd be in heaven. Oh. Your intelligent mind will know that the odds of the worst thing happening is slim to nil. You can then go back to the beginning and ask, what's the most likely thing that will happen? In the case of a disability claim being denied, you might appeal the ruling and get accepted. Or you'd take out a loan, or take an aborter to help make ends meet, or move in with a relative until you're feeling better, and then you'd gradually recover and get your life back on track, because that's who you are. You're resilient. You see that your worst case scenario is unlikely, and chances are good that it's all going to work out. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence with every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face, you're able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. So to recap the 4 strategies: 1, remind yourself of the other challenges you've overcome in your life. You've got this. 2, lean into your spiritual beliefs. 3, keep affirming that you're okay right now, this minute. And 4, face the fear. Imagine the worst thing that could happen, and then the most likely thing that will happen. Nelson Mandela said, "The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." I hope these tips can help you conquer or at least manage some of the fears that come with long COVID. Thanks for joining me. If you like this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Until then, be kind to yourself and each other.